delighted to pass you back over to Duncan, who, we'll wrap this up with the final panel. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and good afternoon now, everyone. Good to say good afternoon. Mike, okay? Yes. So we are, in this session, actually, we're going to break down success and the CMO, and I've got a brilliant panel just before lunch to enlighten everyone and explain what's happening and with lots of solutions. So I will introduce one by one. Rachel Forde, who is co-founder of TheZoo, also former CEO of and Spark. Simon Edward, who is director of Southbank and former VP and CMO of IBM, very recently. And then finally, Rob Alexander, who is partner at Headland Consultancy and also has a background in advertising and planning and creative. So we've got a brilliant cast to help us navigate this. So I think I shared a little bit earlier on some kind of facts around some of the complexity in terms of what CMOs are being asked to deliver. I'm going to expand on that because obviously it's always more complex. So we had, obviously doing more for less, the kind of acceleration of innovation, but actually on top of that as well, some other kind of fundamentals that are coming into the CMO lens is sustainability. So scrutiny and demands around ESG, some stats behind that actually, even though 70% of business leaders think eventually no kind of investment decisions will be made without considering ESG, 80% of them think they don't have enough resources yet to meet ESG disclosure needs. So big challenge there. Consumer expectations, driving forward. The UK study on the 4-day week, I think, has been very topical. Expectations around privacy and security. But also, I think, interestingly now, 25% of consumers say businesses have the largest responsibility to positively change the world, even over government. So there's so much pressure now on corporations and what they're expected to do. And much of that is falling into the CMO's role at the centre. So super complex. So I'm going to start with you, Simon. You've had a very amazing and long and successful career as a CMO and at IBM. It was your dream job. We spoke about it beforehand. And actually, when we're talking, I think you've lived actually a lot of this in your role in terms of the different areas that you've been involved with during that tenure. How did you navigate all of these challenges and the complexity and different stakeholders? How did you approach that?
So, afternoon, everybody. So thank you for that. I think it starts with understanding where your CEO sits, what the priorities, what the purpose of the organisation is about. So I think you have to start there. I spent 35 years with IBM and left 10 days ago. So I've got this newfound freedom, which is amazing. But in all that time, we had different CEOs, we had different drivers in the business. And I think as a marketing leader, as a CMO, and as a VP on the board, I think it starts with understanding what the organisation needs to do. The CMO role is very, very noisy. When I was made a CMO, I was told it was very lonely as a CMO. I didn't find it lonely, but I found about 75% of what I was doing, I didn't have any idea the CMO was responsible for it. So all these things land on you. So you've got to work out a way somehow to cut through the noise. The way I did it was I focused on 3 areas. And the areas weren't consistently the same as I executed them, but there were 3 dimensions. The first dimension was the people in the marketing organisation and the people in the company and the people in the partners that we work with. But the people was the very first thing. If you can get the right people, if you can engage and train them, if you make sure they're motivated, if you bring them in and understand them as individuals, then you've got a great starting point. The second thing that I focused on was actually the clients. And I put the clients number 2 before the people, ahead of the people, people number 1. Because if you don't have the right people, even going to the clients, you cannot deliver the service you need to deliver. But understanding the clients, understanding what they value, who the buyers are. I worked in a B2B environment, so complex buying situations, multiple people, And yes, B2B buyers are still humans. So still navigating what they're looking for, how to make them heroes, becomes really important. And then the third piece was the business, and understanding what needed to be done. Was it the point that you needed to save the farm because things weren't going well, or was it hyper growth and you need to go out there and tap into how you were going to go and actually drive that growth in the business? Were there capacity constraints? Were there areas that needed to be solved? So I focused on 3 areas, but what I did in those areas and what we did in those areas as a team varied over time. So that's the way I broke it down. Complex, noisy, not lonely, but focus becomes really, really important to work out what you're going to drive. But change that focus based on the CEO and the board. If you don't, you become irrelevant.
Absolutely. Well, and the people become so important then to help you navigate
very much so.
All of those different challenges, processes. Rachel, so thinking, I guess, and this is largely looking back at partly your career in running the agencies that you were involved in, what kind of changes did you see during that period, and how did you approach supporting actually the CMOs? What was important and what did you focus on?
Yeah, and I think that word support is absolutely right, because it is a complex world that we live in. And, look, we've talked about it this morning, media is constantly changing. There's constantly a proliferation of channels and new challenges, and any good agency will evolve to suit client needs. And I think Yari mentioned it, that, you go from being agency-centric to client-centric. So the client-centric bit is that actually as an agency, you've got to be adept at all of those capabilities and skill sets that you need. But then I think there's some behaviours and, I suppose, values you put at the heart then of that relationship with the client. Because I do think a CMO's role is really, really, as you say, or half the stuff you didn't even know you were responsible for. So I think the agency and the partners that you work with have to be that trusted business partner. And so with that, I think you've got to be able to evolve and adapt. That's the whole thing, So any agency that looks the same as it did 2 years ago is not evolved and adapt to client needs. I think you've got to also have I suppose, a culture of education and upskilling. Because again, how do CMOs in the marketing department keep ahead of all the trends and what's emerging technology, etc.? So there's a whole kind of, education piece. We talked about data in the one before. I mean, there is so much data, and there's so much data in client organisations. I hope it's not IBM, but data sits in a lot of silos. How do you help CMOs to pull all that together and make meaningful, kind of, I suppose, actionable insights out of that? And also, what's the data and technology roadmap? Again, IBM, I'm sure you've got it all worked out, but it's almost like that domino effect, that you change one thing in your roadmap, in your tech stack, and then it's going to domino into something else. So you really have to be, I suppose, if you go back to that, being adaptable and agile, because there's going to be lots of different constraints, and just be that partner and that trusted business partner that, we've got your back, we can do this together, and whatever it is, we will evolve together. But you can trust us because we are transparent and we're accountable to what we're delivering. Because again, talking this morning, we're all here to drive business and drive, ultimately EBITDA. How do we make sure we've got the right, processes and, I suppose, data in place to demonstrate value of media and advertising? But yeah, it's complex on all sides. Try and make it simple though. That's what we try to do.
I think actually, just even on that point, is one thing we do with some of our agency partners quite regularly is actually come together and share some of our expertise within the building, of our analysts who are actually working and looking at quarterly earnings reports, and they're helping then the agencies have a deeper understanding across the broader business of their own clients to help connect the marketing kind of discussion with the business goals and financial implications. So that all comes together. So that consistency is often really, really critical. Rob, I'm going to come to you. So how, one thing that we've definitely noticed is this kind of connection between corporate communications, marketing, actually, and even it can go as far as then employee engagement and communication as well. But this very much kind of sits in your sphere. What trends are you seeing there, and what's important then in terms of connecting how a company is communicating as a corporate, and then how they're communicating to their consumers or clients?
Well, thank you for that one. I think actually the biggest thing, I mean, it speaks to what Simon said and your example about Bloomberg. The challenge for the CMO, it's getting harder and harder because the core day job of marketing, media, pricing, I mean, the things that a CMO is responsible for are getting broader and broader. And then within a business, the CMO should be getting involved in employee communications, investor communications sometimes, and all the other parts of the kind of different audiences. And CMOs bring a brilliant skill set to that because they have an empathy for their audience, they're communications professionals, and yet those audiences are usually owned by other people. So in a lot of organizations, internal comms, HR will own employee engagement, and they will guard it jealously. And investor relations own the investor, the analyst, capital markets, and will guard that very, very jealously. And those silos are the enemy of success because how you get across those silos, and in a good organization and a modern organisation, you hope those silos are starting to break down. And as a business, we've grown in the last 10 years by fundamentally advising on corporate, on financial and public affairs. I mean, we do all three, but we were built for all three from the ground up, and it's working, and that's why we've grown. But it's really hard for a CMO, and I think that's the challenge and the opportunity is to join that up. But it's for a CMO, that's about being fluent in the fast-moving world of data and media and marketing, as well as reading Bloomberg, obviously, but also understanding the challenges and the conversations that are important to the business. It's not just the customer conversations and the consumer conversations, it's the business, the investor, because it's if you understand that, then you can make a difference. But it's really hard. Sorry if there are CMOs in the audience.
Simon, because you're fairly unique actually in your role that you manage corporate comms and marketing and a lot of other areas, I might add as well. So how did that work at IBM, and why do you think that's important?
So I think the first thing is I've been a CMO for the last 5 years. Before that, I was the global vice president in charge of our intelligence function. So I did all the modelling and the data stuff that we've been talking about. I was fascinated by this session just before this one. So I spent 5 years doing that. So I think one of the advantages of being in a large organisation for a long time is you build that sort of connective tissue, a bit like a spider's web. And whatever role you're in then, sitting around the boardroom table is about connecting the dots and bringing value. And I think it starts with empathy. So, and Rob, I fully get what you say there. You have to understand the language, you have to understand the priorities, the vision, the goals of each person around that table. And when you start as a CMO, you've got to sort of land gently and then think about how you demonstrate value, how you demonstrate competence, and how you build that empathy with each person around the boardroom table. People talk about, and I don't know whether any of you do it, about having your own personal board of directors. So who are those people that help to direct you in the decisions that you make at work and at home? And they may include people you work with, they may include people outside, they may include your family, people you can go to depending on what the challenge is. And you need to build that collection, that selection of people around you. I very much saw myself as a servant leader in order to be able to have the skills to cover all the pillars you mentioned. So I didn't want to be the best communicator, the best internal comms person, the best events person, the best digital person. What I wanted, the best people around me. And my job was to enable them to do the best job so that they feel motivated, they feel empowered, they felt trusted. And when I left the company 10 days ago, I felt humbled, I felt proud of the team that I had built that continue to do the work. And the fact that they continue to message me, I continue to coach them, and I continue to remain connected to the organisation and the team, to me demonstrates what I'm proud of in terms of the time I spent with the team. So I think it's really important as a CMO to understand what the business is looking for and what the board's looking for, to build that empathy, value and trust around that table, and then to connect the dots. And you really don't have to be able to do everything. You need to have what I term, and you spoke about staying fresh on skills, but a growth mindset, so that you're not closed to things. Give it a go, dive in there, learn from it, ask questions, and then see where it takes you. And that becomes fun, and it also means that hopefully you're not lonely as a CMO as you journey through.
How, just to build on that a little bit, I think one of the things that's quite interesting that probably separates B2B from B2C is that the long kind of window of purchase influence. Right?
Yeah.
If you're selling FMCG, you can market and convert sometimes fairly quickly. Big B2B investment decisions take a long time. How does that work? I guess it'd be interesting for everyone to dive in on this a little bit as well in terms of thoughts. But with CEOs changing, with CMOs changing, and therefore maybe strategy shifting a little bit.
So
How do you navigate that, particularly in that kind of
sure. So I think there are
B2B
two aspects. One's in the organisation you're working in, and the second is the organisations you're selling to. In the organisation you're working in, where probably you have more control over it, I think it's about ensuring that you've got an enduring purpose. So if as an organisation you have an enduring purpose, if you're clear on what you bring to the world, then I think you can continually line up to that. As CEOs change, and as CMO for the last 5 years, I had 3 CEOs. They came in, they had different outlooks, different visions in terms of where we were going. Every one, we worked out, in fact, what we're going to do. Different times of the economy. You know, we lived through all the challenges of being locked up at home for a while. So there were different things that come along. I think that makes it fascinating, interesting, and an opportunity. But you have to navigate it. But an enduring purpose is the thing, I think, for an organisation. And for CMOs and for marketing professionals, it's really important to tease that out. IBM's enduring purpose was about being the catalyst that makes the world better. That's where it aimed. It wasn't about selling computers or services or software. It was about being that catalyst. And hence, during the 112 years the company's been around, it's changed in terms of what it's delivered and the value that it's brought, but it's had an enduring purpose. I think for clients, when you're working with your end user clients, it's being clear on the unique value that you bring to them. So you mentioned you don't need to have all the data that's sitting there, or maybe you do need to have it, but you've got to bring value from it. And we spoke about insight earlier. Data and insight, I don't think, gets you all the way there. The previous panel spoke about the fact that insight was the answer. I don't agree with them. I think it's the action that comes from that insight, and I think the role that we often have is championing that action. So if you can use the data, if you can get to insight, if you can inspire people and then champion action, then what happens as a result of that hopefully delivers the outcome that you're looking for. And if it doesn't, that doesn't matter. You go back to learning fast and adjusting in flight, which many people speak about. So I think it's really important to champion that action, and the CMO has a strong role in that. It covers many, many areas for sure.
I think we talked about that a little bit this morning and touched on in the talent area. I think one of the key trends I see is people being able to make that connection between business challenge and technology. You don't have to be able to write the code, but you need to be able to understand how to connect those dots. Rachel, how from an agency or consultancy perspective, how then do you support, and what kind of technology and data, how do you kind of look at that service to add that human value alongside it?
Yeah, sorry, I could just listen to Simon all day, though. I bet I'm just thinking, oh my God, your team must be.
Have a chat with my wife.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, data and technology is an enabler, isn't it? And actually, it's how then do you organise that? How do you organise the data to be able to get the actionable insight from it? And I do think that there is a power of the impact that CMOs can deliver, just like, a simple dashboard with some simple KPIs. That actually, I think it's all about involving the board on that and having that open and transparent communication. But this is what we're trying to achieve. Let's agree on that at the beginning. Then we can look at the data, see how it's working. They're definitely not interested in this at all. And then bye. And then
enjoy lunch.
I think we are actually 10 minutes behind, aren't we? So if you do need to go, don't worry about it. But I think it's about having being organised around the same data sets, same KPIs. Those KPIs can be marketing objectives or EBITDA or customer lifetime value or whatever it is. I think agree what you want to achieve, then monitor that data together. I think it's, again, when I talked about being adaptable and flexible, it's about actually, as things move over, because we can measure so much in real time, that actually don't be afraid to course correct, and also don't be afraid to say, listen, actually do what we got that wrong, but it's okay, we're going to do this. Business, as you say, through COVID, lots of business things change, so how can we use data then to make quick decisions, because we should have that at our fingertips. I think that's a way that we can, I suppose, all, you know, be organised around the same goals, which are not just marketing, but they're business. You know, the value we're trying to create is ultimately to the bottom line, but through the value of the brand and the marketing that drives.
And Rachel, I think we have a killer piece of data. And so much of the data discussion turns to numeric, and people started talking about qual earlier on. But I think there's a killer piece of data that we have in marketing, and that's the voice of the client. And we have to absolutely use that. And you can use the voice of the client as a sample of one, and it's still valuable. But it often cuts through some of the noise and the rubbish that goes on. It often shortcuts getting to a decision. So putting the voice of the client at the centre of the discussion really can change the dialogue. And somebody that's maybe in a boardroom who is maybe more junior, doesn't have the experience, maybe they're seen as younger around the table and they're trying to break in, maybe it's a woman in an all-male environment, for instance, or there's some level of diversity that's not being included. The voice of the client is up your sleeve, honestly. That's the thing that cuts through. Put the voice of the client in there. Nobody can argue against it. So many other data points and information they'll argue against. Nobody around the boardroom is going to argue against the voice of the client. So I agree with you fully. We've got some real trump card data we can use.
Yeah, and actually that builds on the point that Michael made earlier, the Vox Pop. Do you know what I mean? Actually, it's that qualitative data. We've got loads of quantitative, haven't we? Actually, you say it's that qualitative, and that's good. I think that's really great advice.
How does that, Rob, how does that fall into some of the work that you do, I guess, in some of the corporate communications? Where does the client objective, like, because I guess where we're getting to is that crossover between marketing and corporate comms.
And that's where I think on the journey I've gone from consumer into corporate comms, and I think when I was in consumer land, or even semi-corporate, the gap was really big. And there was like, oh, this is corporate stuff for Shell or HSBC, and then we're selling credit cards and loans around the world, and they don't really connect. Actually, they do. But I think they're getting ever closer and closer. I mean, the way that media has changed, the media landscape and people's access to data, you can't segment what you're telling an investor from what you're telling a CEO, a partner, a client, a supplier, or a regulator. They're all going to see the same things. So actually, that integration is both the challenge and the opportunity. But the voice of the client or the consumer and the ownership of that is, I mean, I'm totally agree with Simon. It is the trump card. It's the thing that marketing has that nobody else has. And almost at any level of an organisation, it's the most powerful thing. I heard the CEO of Shell, this is a long time ago, this is 15 years ago, telling a story in a top 100 exec meeting that they didn't get a contract from the government, so they were bidding against Exxon for a 30-year contract because the minister had been into a petrol station and the toilet was absolutely filthy. And at that level, and he had been told that by the minister of this nation state, and that's customer experience from top to bottom of 35,000 petrol stations versus a 30-year, billions and billions of dollars. That's why brand matters, but it's also why the CMO of the retail business is hugely important. And I think that's the power that CMOs have, but they need to connect it via empathy and via understanding the business of what are the conversations that the top of the business is having that they're worried about, and speaking that language. If you only speak the marketing language, because I've been in rooms where it doesn't work, and that's because the CMO has only spoken marketing language. And it's great in Cannes, and it's great when you're talking to the Drum or Marketing Week or your agencies, but it's a different language at the top level. And that being fluent and remembering who you're talking to, in the same way that you do with any communication or marketing, it's just the same.
So and this is not on our list of questions, but it does strike me in just thinking about some of the kind of discussions we have, conversations, and when you look at some of the data around customer expectation in terms of corporations making like societal good, and that being more important than government, actually then is even customer feedback more complex. Because it used to be maybe about product or service, so fairly like straightforward, our product's great, but it doesn't do this. We need to innovate more in this area. We're losing market share. How do we do that? Straightforward, challenge and get people. But when it's like, well, we like this bit, but you're not doing enough, and like, where do you start with those challenges?
I think customer feedback is becoming more and more complicated because we're each of us, if you think about your own sort of non-work lives, we touch vendors, we touch organisations in so many different ways. It's digital, it's physical, it's through other people, it's stuff you read, it's stuff you try, it's your peers, it's the social, it's the influence. So there's so many different ways that we touch it. So it becomes really important. I think the biggest impact that's happened recently is the fact that so many people now are self-sufficient. So you can take that first bit of the buying journey. You go through it without going to a vendor, without talking about it. You go and do your search, talk to people, look on social media, see who's around, you put it onto a group and ask what people have done, and you get all of that feedback, and the brand's not even involved in it. Maybe you get 75% of the buying journey done before you even go to a retailer or a brand or a vendor to actually go and think about or consider buying it. And it's the same in the B2B environment, that people are going through that and talking about it. People here will be thinking about the agencies they work with, and when they're at this event, they'll be saying, actually, have you got a good events agency? Do you know who to do it? We had one and they didn't, and they did, or whatever. And everybody's given that view. And a brand is broken really, really quickly. The point you were making, and there's a hotel chain that I will not stay in, and for the last 15 years, I've not booked a single event in their hotels, and I was a big fan of them. I was a gold whatever, platinum whatever with them, and I stopped using them. The reason I stopped using them was because they upset my daughter. I had my daughter in tears because they didn't play ball, and they cancelled something and they wouldn't sort it, etc., etc. So as a result of that, I have never ever stayed with them since, and I will never work with them again in terms of it. So the word will not be taken in our house. But that's it. In that one moment, from being a loyal customer from a B2B point of view, I stopped working with that particular brand, and they've lost a huge amount as a result of it. Maybe that's bitter, but actually the experience is I couldn't afford for the same thing to happen from a business point of view. It was too big a risk, and they didn't care about my daughter or me as a customer in sorting it out. So I believe it's never the issue that's the problem. Things go wrong. I had another example. I like watches. We were talking about this earlier. This watch that I have here, my son bought me actually, and it was quite an expensive watch. He gave it to me and it didn't work. And he'd spent a lot of money on it, and it was a treat, a nice present. And but the organisation sorted it out, and they were in Switzerland, and it was sent back, and it was sorted out, and it came back, and they fitted a brand new movement to it, etc. So I hated the brand to start with. I now love the brand in terms of what they did, and their service was exemplary. So the problem wasn't the issue. Keeping tabs on the client, understanding the issue and solving it, that's where it makes a difference. But if you haven't got that direct relationship and that touch point, how do you actually do that today? That's the challenge we face.
Yeah, I think, and brands, I think, are also judged a lot by their communication, which makes them really nervous, certainly in some of these areas, around how they communicate and what they communicate. I think one of the things that we've seen that's been really successful, and Phil mentioned it earlier on, is building these kind of data tools and barometers, but not to actually showcase how a client is actually working in a sphere, but more to demonstrate a leadership position at a sector level, because it separates the brand from work in that field. How, Rachel, what's your view on that? How did you guide clients through, or was that something that you were less involved in?
Yeah.
What would be your view of supporting businesses?
Yeah, I'd say it's less because, again, it's almost like, we would see one part of a CMO and then all of the other touch points that they were responsible for. But really, as the CMO and the brand guardian, you are responsible for every single touch point from the moment they search you up to the very final purchase, and then the after sale, as you say. That's very, very powerful. And I just think, again, it's a huge task for CMOs to be across everything, but they really should be. So they need to have good teams, because they can't do everything. They're only human. I mean, we haven't even talked about the human element of actually, your personal board, and also, from a mental health point of view as well, who's helping you. I talked about skill sets, you've talked about capabilities, and then again, you're not superhuman. You can't do everything, but you do want to have the direction over it, because it can make or break a brand, and again, that's going to drive down to the bottom line, isn't it? So I'd say as an agency, we didn't get so involved. I'd say that, again, if you were a true business partner, you'd potentially try and help if a CMO needed it. I think the other element is, again, in the world that we're in, I think a lot of CMOs are grappling with, where does it, from sofa to store? Actually, it's we talk about consumer journeys, and again, owning the entire consumer journey, but that can start and finish in lots of different places. So, yeah, I mean, I think we started in a very complex world. It really is. So you need to choose your partners carefully, I'd say, who you're collaborating with.
And I like the concept of collaboration, because certainly the way I work with agencies is as partners. So we used to have our marketing and communications leadership team, and I had responsibility for comms as well. And around that table, I had our key agencies. And I used to run quarterly meetings cross-agency, where I'd get the 4 key agencies together around a table, and we'd all share. So that we'd share from a business point of view the challenges, the opportunities, the dreams that we have. And each of the agencies would also cover it. So we'd come together in terms of PR, in terms of comms, in terms of the event side of things and what was happening, in terms of creative and in terms of media placement. And effectively, we'd sit there and spend a day with my core leadership team. Everyone would be on the same page. Everyone would know everybody. We'd go out for lunch. We'd go out for a drink afterwards. And that is brilliant. It's brilliant in getting stuff done. It's more important when things go wrong, so that nobody points fingers and everybody's focused on fixing it. So it's a really, really good point, Rachel.
And consistency is key, isn't it? I think the more even we notice that when we're supporting partners, if everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, like going in the same direction, it makes everything a lot easier.
But that point about collaboration is, I've worked for clients who deliberately set agencies up against each other and believe that they generate value by keeping their agencies and their people uncertain, unstable, in fear. And thankfully it seems to be in decline, but there are, Sergio Zeman sold a lot of books by getting people to go, that was the way forward. And then you've also got clients who believe in genuine collaboration with their agencies, but also increasingly, I think in today's complex world, you have to collaborate beyond your organisation. You can only address climate change and get to net zero in your supply chain by working with your partners. Yeah. You can't just tell them to get to net zero. So, and that has to be through collaboration. And if you want to hit to scope 3, and along your consumption piece, then how the hell you do that without working with your retailers or the other bodies in your industry, or even the people, other industries adjacent. That's the kind of new corporate behaviour which has to start internally and with your agencies. But from a corporate behaviour point of view, I think one of the biggest future trends is collaborating beyond your comfort zone, including people who probably you either compete with in some cases or will be attacking you.
And Rob, how many people do their best work when they're scared? Yeah. When they're scared of the contracts or scared of what they're doing? People either lead through respect or they lead through fear. And fear does not work. People just get away with it. It's like, keep your head below the parapet, don't get it chopped off.
The most miserable 2 years of my career were working on a large global client, remained nameless, who took the keep everyone unstable and unsure. And it's
dreadful.
All the good people, and it's in the DNA of the business because it stayed being miserable. And the people who came after me in my role, everyone lasted 2 years or less.
And what was EBITDA like?
At that point, very good because they were in a category that was doing really well.
3 years later, probably.
Yeah, once the category stopped doing that, then they're really struggling.
Yeah. It's much easier when you're growing, isn't it? It's much easier when you're growing.
Mean.
But hey, to be a CMO and growth, that's easy. That's easy. You've got to do it during this sort of time. Much more fun as well.
That's the perfect ending, isn't it?
I think, one question.
Right.
We're going to end. You don't get off that lightly. So given this is future
hungry?
success.
Yeah. It's 26 seconds.
Future success and a CMO, what's going to be the most important thing, skill for a CMO to have in the next 5 years? One thing.
Oh God, okay. I'm going to say then technology and using AI effectively.
Rob?
I'm going to nick Simon's empathy.
Empathy.
I mean, without empathy for your consumer, your clients, the rest of the organisation, you'll just be stuck in your silo, and that doesn't work.
Simon.
There is only one word that counts on this, and the word is relevance. Because the skills will change, and in 5 years' time, well, I mean, who knew about AI being so visible, so on the table 5 years ago? Who knows in 5 years' time what it will be? So it's about being relevant. Relevant at every table, relevant in every discussion, relevant in every meeting, relevant in every decision. If you're called in, that's the skill that you need, relevance. And that relevance needs, you used the word agile earlier on, it needs that level of agility and growth mindset to get there. And all the other things are relevant right now, but I don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years' time. So relevance.
It's like you kind of, we set that up. Bloomberg gives you relevance.
It does. Look, we've sat at the table in Bloomberg.
I mean, we almost planned this. Listen, we are out of time. I'm sure everyone's super hungry. Thank you very much, Rachel, Simon, Rob.
Thank you.
Great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh.